Now I recognize the new vice chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Griffith of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Archambault, get out your money. You ready? All right. So my understanding of your testimony was that you were in fact saying that the states have to make choices with their limited resources, and that the federal government under the ACA is going to lower its Medicaid expansion money down to 90%. As states find themselves with larger burdens than was anticipated when they expanded Medicaid, they have to make decisions on where it's cut, and we have created through the ACA, and I say we loosely because I wasn't here when they voted on that, but the Congress and the government created a situation where the states are rewarded for cutting traditional Medicaid, which deals mostly with children and people who are in greater need, and that because of that disincentive or that incentive to spend it on the new folks, the newly found under Medicaid, under the new categories, we create the situation where states are having to make a decision as to whether they quicken the shortage on the waivers, get rid of those waivers as fast as they can, or whether they spend that money somewhere else. Was my understanding correct?
Correct, Congressman. There's both direct and indirect outcomes as related to expansion. And my point is that we are not fulfilling the promises to the most vulnerable in our society, waitlist or not. But we are making new promises to an able-bodied population that does not qualify for long-term welfare benefits in any other place, and states are being put in a situation where they're having to make very tough decisions and making cuts in reimbursement rates that directly impact those with developmental disabilities, those in nursing homes. The access and quality questions that have surrounded Medicaid for decades will only get worse for the truly needy.
And so what you're just saying is we need to pay attention to that, and we need to make sure that we have incentives that encourage people to take care of the truly needy and the young, and maybe the new group we need to refigure that formula out. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. I think as part of the repeal and replace discussion, as we're talking about changing Medicaid going forward, it absolutely must be on the table, and we would strongly recommend looking at freezing new enrollment in expansion states and not allowing other states to expand so you can address this underlying issue of refocusing programs on the truly needy.
We have a real habit of doing that. Mr. Howard, I'm going to ask you, and the reason I said get your money out is because I thought the $20 bill versus the $2 was very instructive, Mr. Archambault. Mr. Howard, you touched on this, but you didn't get into detail. We have a situation where we've, even in traditional Medicaid, we have rewarded states that play games. Virginia elected not to have a sick tax. That's what it was called when there was a proposal a number of years ago, a couple decades ago, to start taxing the beds of the sick so that they could create that money and then put it into Medicaid and then get matching money from the federal government. Even though we're at a fairly low match, that would have given us those $2 for money that we collected from sick people. But many states have come up with these various schemes to get money by claiming that they're charging more, and then what they're really doing is creating some kind of a sick tax scheme. And shouldn't we put a stop to that? And over time, I'm not saying we have to get rid of it immediately, but shouldn't we over time be trying to get rid of that so that everybody knows what exactly they're getting and not having to charge sick people money so we can get more money for Medicaid?
The federal government has capped the amount of provider taxes that states are able to use, but still, we're talking a very significant amount of money. I think the last estimate from GA was about $25 billion. Many states use these provider taxes. They use enhanced payment rates for state-owned facilities, intergovernmental transfers to draw down and raise their effective federal match.
And while they may be legal, there's some real ethical questions about that, isn't there?
Well, and it's a real issue of program
me,
efficiency,
yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, because I want to move on to something else. We heard somebody earlier say that Obamacare wasn't collapsing, and that was some myth. I got to tell you, we got all kinds of numbers, 25% average increase, nearly a third of U.S. counties have only one insurer, $1 trillion in new taxes, 4.7 million Americans had to change their health care plan because they got kicked off of the plan that they liked, all kinds of problems out there. But you know what I find instructive is anecdotal. Happened to me yesterday twice. After church, a group of us generally go to lunch. I try to stay out of politics at lunch, and a discussion broke out at the other end of the table I was not involved in, where they were talking about what do we do as we go forward, and one fellow said, look, as a Christian, I don't mind paying some more money, but when my insurance rates for my family have gone from $450, $500 to $1,250 a year, and I'm getting less insurance, it's hurting my family, and that's a problem. Later that evening, at a small group gathering of different people, there was a big discussion about whether or not a family could afford to justify spending money for their daughter who had the flu. Several families have been ravaged by flu over the last couple of weeks because in order to afford health insurance, they'd gotten such a high deductible, it was going to cost them $75 to get Tamiflu. And they were debating whether or not they should do that if their other kids got it and what they should do as they go forward. These are real-life examples of how Obamacare is, in fact, failing the American people. I yield back.